The city never slept, but Henry Lewis often felt as if he lived above it, untouched, unbothered, insulated by glass and wealth. At 42, he had built a financial empire that stretched across real estate technology and luxury investments. His penthouse in Manhattan crowned the skyline, a fortress of steel and glass, where silence was purchased as easily as marble floors. Henry had everything a man could buy: cars polished like mirror suits, stitched by the finest Italian hands, and a staff trained to anticipate his needs before he spoke. Yet on this night, standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows, whiskey swirling in his hand, Henry admitted to himself what none of those riches could conceal. He had no heir. 2 marriages had collapsed under the weight of his coldness. Love, he decided, was nothing more than a performance, a fragile illusion that left behind bitterness and lawyers' bills. Relationships demanded vulnerability, and Henry had built his life on the opposite control. But his child was different. An heir was not about romance. An heir was legacy. Continuation. Proof that Henry Lewis, the man who had conquered markets, would leave behind more than skyscrapers and stock portfolios. He didn't want the chaos of another marriage. He didn't want compromises, emotions, or unpredictable attachments. What he wanted was an arrangement clean and absolute, a contract. Henry turned from the window and crossed the polished floor to his desk. He picked up the pen his father had once given him, a relic from a man who had left little else. The elder Lewis had died without fortune, without reputation, a man erased by mediocrity. Henry carried that absence like a scar. He swore that his name would never vanish, that his empire would never fade. But who would inherit it? Who would carry it forward? Henry pulled a leather notebook closer and began sketching possibilities with the same precision he used in boardrooms. Adoption was dismissed in seconds. Too many variables, too much scrutiny. Women from his social circles, dangerous. A child tied to them meant endless complications, inheritance battles, gossip columns, leverage he could never control. No, what Henry needed was someone with nothing to lose, someone who would not demand a seat at his table when the ink dried, someone who would accept a transaction without strings. For a moment, Henry allowed himself to picture it, a woman hidden by the shadows of the city, someone invisible to the world of men like him. She would carry his heir, and in return she would walk away with security she had never known. No entanglements, no risks. Henry leaned back in his chair, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. The plan was simple. Cold, yes, but effective. It would give him what wealth could not: continuity. Outside, traffic rumbled like a restless beast, horns echoing against the skyscrapers. Henry took another sip of whiskey and whispered to the empty room, "This is business. Nothing more." But as the words left his mouth, a flicker of unease passed through him. For the first time in years, Henry wondered if there were things even money could not control. The morning sun poured between the towers of downtown Manhattan, casting long shadows that swallowed the forgotten corners of the city. At one such corner on a patch of concrete, no one bothered to glance at sat Layla Parker. Her hair was tangled, her clothes worn thin from nights spent on benches and shelter floors. In her lap rested a scrap of paper salvaged from a trash can. With a stub of pencil, she sketched lines that curved into faces. Faces she remembered but could not touch anymore. A mother who had died too soon. A younger brother lost to the streets. Herself in another life, when she had a job, an apartment, and the illusion of stability. Passers-by walked around her as if she were invisible. Some clutched their bags tighter, some sneered, and a few muttered under their breath. She had grown used to it. Being a black woman on the street meant bearing not just the weight of poverty, but the sharpened edge of prejudice. Strangers assumed addiction, laziness, danger, never the truth. Never the woman who had once worked double shifts at a hotel, smiling at guests who never looked her in the eye. Layla had lost that job 2 years ago after a manager accused her of theft. No proof, no hearing, just suspicion that clung to her skin like a brand. The police were called, and though charges were dropped, her name was ruined. She couldn't get hired again, not in that industry. And so the fall began, apartment gone, savings drained, dignity stripped away piece by piece until only survival remained. That morning she pressed her pencil harder into the paper, the lead breaking, as if mocking her stubbornness to keep drawing. Around her, the city rushed forward, heels clicking horns, blaring lives, moving at a speed she could no longer match. Then a car stopped at the light across the street. Not just any car, a black Maserati that gleamed like a predator under the sun. Behind the wheel sat a man in a tailored suit, his jawline sharp, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. For a moment Layla thought he hadn't seen her. People like him never did. But then his gaze flicked sideways, landing on her hunched figure. Their eyes met hers, tired but unbroken, his calculating searching. He looked away, then back again, as though something about her disrupted the order of his morning. The light turned green. The Maserati surged forward, swallowing distance in seconds. Layla exhaled, relieved to return to her anonymity. Yet only a few blocks away, Henry Lewis gripped the steering wheel tighter, her image etched into his mind. He tried to dismiss it. Just another homeless woman. Just another reminder of a city overflowing with failures. But something about her eyes unsettled him. They weren't pleading or broken. They were defiant, alive, as though daring the world to keep ignoring her. Henry pulled into a parking lot, cut the engine, and sat in silence. Logic told him to forget her, to continue with his plan. But instinct pulled stronger. Against everything he believed in, he turned the car around. When he reached the corner again, she was still there, pressing the broken pencil to paper, refusing surrender. Henry rolled down the window. "Hey!" His voice was cold, commanding. "Come here." Layla froze, eyes narrowing. A white man in a car like that, nothing good ever came from such encounters. She had heard the stories, lived enough of her own. Slowly she rose to her feet, her thin frame silhouetted against the rush of morning crowds. "I'm not asking twice," Henry added, impatience sharpening his tone. Layla walked closer, each step measured, her suspicion carved deep into every movement. When she reached the curb, she leaned down, her voice low but steady. "What do you want?" Henry studied her face, the high cheekbones, the exhaustion carved into her skin, and beneath it all, a strength that unsettled him. "I want to talk," he said simply. Layla gave a dry laugh. Men in cars like this don't stop to talk. They stop because they think they can buy something. Henry's jaw tightened. "Not that. Get in. We'll go somewhere quiet." For a moment she considered spitting at his polished shoes, walking away, vanishing into the blur of the city. But survival whispered otherwise. Her stomach growled, her body ached, and the night ahead promised only more cold concrete. Against every instinct she opened the door and slid into the leather seat. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. She kept her arms folded, eyes fixed on the passing streets. He didn't try to comfort her or explain himself. He just drove his mind already shifting toward the contract he had begun to draft the night before. In that silence, two worlds collided, his built on glass and privilege, hers carved out of survival and scars of racism. Neither of them knew yet that this collision would shatter everything they thought they understood about power, love, and belonging. The cafe Henry chose was far from the chaos of downtown, a quiet place tucked between glass offices and manicured courtyards. Inside, the smell of roasted coffee hung heavy in the air, the polished floors echoing each step like a performance. For Layla, walking through the door felt like stepping into a world that was never meant to include her. People glanced up when she entered, eyes flicking from her worn jacket to her skin, then quickly away. She knew that look. She had lived with it all her life. The unspoken question, what is she doing here? Henry didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. He led her to a corner table as if the stairs were background noise. For him, they were. For her, they were sharp as knives. "What's your name?" he asked, settling into the chair opposite her. Layla hesitated. "Why does it matter?" "Because I need to know who I'm dealing with." Her chin lifted, her eyes hard. "Layla Parker. But that's all you get for now." Henry leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, voice calm but edged with command. "Fine. Layla, I'll be direct. I want to make you an offer, one that could change your life." She narrowed her eyes. What kind of offer? His words came without hesitation. "I want you to have my child." For a moment, the world stopped. The chatter of the cafe, the hiss of the espresso machine, all of it faded into a ringing silence. Layla blinked, certain she had misheard. "You're joking." Henry's gaze didn't waver. "No, I'm entirely serious. I'll cover all your expenses, provide full support during the pregnancy, and afterward you'll receive enough money to never worry again." Layla let out a short, incredulous laugh, crossing her arms tightly across her chest. "You're insane. You don't even know me. And you think I'd just sell myself to give you a child? This isn't about knowing you." Henry replied, his voice steady, surgical. "It's about a contract. Clean. Simple. No emotional entanglements." Layla stared at him, a storm of anger rising in her chest. She remembered the time she had been reduced to less than human, a store clerk trailing her through aisles, a landlord refusing her application, a cop pulling her over just to ask if the car she drove was really hers. And now here was another man looking at her as if she were a commodity to be bought. "You think because I'm black, homeless, and desperate that I'll just say yes." Her voice was sharp, louder than she intended. A few heads turned in their direction, but Henry didn't flinch. "I think because you have nothing, and I have everything, that you'll see." "The logic," he answered coolly. Layla's stomach twisted. She wanted to throw the glass of water in his face, to storm out and never look back. But then she thought of the cold sidewalk waiting for her tonight, of the shelters overflowing of the stairs, the whispers the nights when hunger gnawed until sleep finally dragged her under. "And what happens after?" she asked, her voice tight. "When the baby's born, you hand me some money and toss me aside." Henry leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "After the child is born, you'll walk away free. No strings, no court battles, a fresh start. And I'll have my heir. That's all." Layla shook her head, fighting the lump in her throat. "You don't see me at all, do you? You see a womb, a contract, not a person." His jaw tightened, but his voice didn't change. "I see someone who could benefit from this as much as I will. It's business, Layla. Nothing more." She clenched her fists beneath the table nails, biting into her palms. Part of her wanted to spit her refusal in his face, but another part, the part that had slept in alleys, skipped meals, been treated like trash because of her skin, whispered cruel truths. Maybe this was her only chance. "I need time," she said finally, forcing each word past the knot in her throat. Henry nodded, as if he had expected it. "You have 24 hours. After that, I move on." He stood, straightened his jacket, and left without another glance. The cafe door swung shut behind him, leaving Layla surrounded by the hum of conversations that no longer included her. She sat there staring at her reflection in the dark window. For years, she had fought against being invisible. Now, for the first time, someone saw her, but not as she was, only as something he could use. The rain fell in thin, relentless sheets the next evening, turning the city into a blur of wet pavement and neon reflections. Layla stood at the foot of a glass tower, her jacket soaked through her heartbeat, loud in her ears. Every instinct told her to walk away, but survival whispered otherwise. She pressed the buzzer. A clipped voice answered. Moments later, the lobby doors unlocked, and she stepped into marble and gold, a world far removed from the grit she carried on her skin. Henry's assistant, Stephanie, a tall woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tone, met her with a look that lingered too long. Layla felt it immediately, the silent judgment, the practiced smile that didn't reach the eyes. She had seen that look before in offices where her applications had been dismissed, in stores where clerks shadowed her every step. "This way," Stephanie said, her heels clicking against the polished floor, as if marking the rhythm of Layla's intrusion. The elevator opened to Henry's penthouse. He stood waiting, posture precise, a folder on the table behind him. No pleasantries, no wasted seconds. "You've decided," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. Layla met his gaze, forcing her voice steady. "Yes, I'll do it." Henry's expression didn't shift. He motioned to the folder. "Then let's make it official." The contract lay open, its language cold and precise. It detailed every aspect: full medical care, private accommodations, financial compensation upon delivery. and in bold letters, the clause that cut deepest all parental rights, surrendered. Layla traced the words with her eyes, feeling the weight of each line press against her chest. This wasn't just ink. It was her body, her child, her future. Yet hunger had its own gravity, and homelessness offered no mercy. She looked up at Henry. "This paper, do you even see what it asks of me?" "I see clarity," he replied smoothly. "It protects us both. You get security. I get my heir. No misunderstandings." Layla wanted to scream. Instead, she steadied her hand. "And when people ask where your child came from, when they see me, black homeless, what then?" Henry's jaw tightened, a flicker of discomfort betraying his calm exterior. "They won't see you. They'll see me. My name, my legacy." Her stomach twisted, rage mixing with despair. She thought of all the times her existence had been erased, her voice silenced, her worth reduced to less than human. Now here was another erasure wrapped in legal jargon. Stephanie slid a pen across the table, her lips pressed thin. "Sign here." Layla hesitated. Her reflection in the glass window caught her eye, a soaked, weary woman who had fought too long for too little. She heard her mother's voice, faint but insistent. "Sometimes you take the door life opens, even if it wasn't built for you." Her hand trembled as she pressed the pen to paper. One stroke, then another. Her name sprawled across the contract, binding her to a future she could not yet imagine. Henry leaned back, satisfied. To him, it was a transaction completed, a problem solved. But to Layla, it felt like a bargain struck with fate itself. "Good," Henry said quietly. "From this moment on, you'll have everything you need." Stephanie escorted her to the waiting car, a sleek black vehicle parked at the curb. Layla slid into the leather seat, rain streaking the window as the city blurred past. As the car pulled away, she whispered to herself, "What have I done?" For the first time in years, she wasn't stepping into the cold unknown. She was stepping into a world where wealth built walls higher than she had ever seen, walls that might keep her safe or cage her completely. The iron gates opened with a slow, mechanical hum, revealing the mansion beyond a sprawl of marble and glass, nestled among manicured gardens. For Layla, who had spent the last years counting cracks in sidewalks, the sight was unreal, almost cruel in its perfection. The car glided up the long driveway and stopped at the entrance. Stephanie opened the door with the air of someone ushering in an unwelcome guest. "This is your new residence," she said, her tone flat, but edged with something colder. "Try to remember where you are." Layla stepped onto the stone steps, her damp sneakers squeaking against the polished surface. The massive doors opened and she was led inside. The foyer exploded with light crystal chandeliers, sweeping staircases, floors gleaming like mirrors. Every surface screamed wealth, but beneath the grandeur was something else, a chill, as if the house itself disapproved of her presence. A pair of housemaids lingered near the hallway, whispering. One glanced openly at Layla's skin, then looked away, lips curling with disdain. Layla's jaw tightened. She had lived this scene too many times before entering spaces where she was not expected, where her presence was read as intrusion. Stephanie's voice cut through the silence. "Your suite is upstairs, one of the best in the house. You'll find everything you need." As they climbed the staircase, Layla caught her reflection in the gilded mirrors. A black woman in worn clothes moving through a palace not built for her. She wondered if the house saw her as an intruder too. Her suite was larger than any apartment she had ever lived in. A bed draped in linen windows that opened to acres of garden. A bathroom with marble sinks and gold fixtures. Stephanie placed her luggage, 2 small bags Henry had provided, onto the bed. "If you require anything, ask me," Stephanie said. The politeness forced her gaze sharp. "And remember, your presence here is conditional." The words hung heavy even after she left. Conditional. That was the truth, wasn't it? She wasn't a guest. She was part of a transaction. That night, Layla lay on the massive bed, staring at the ceiling. The silence pressed in so different from the restless noise of the streets. But it wasn't peace. It was suffocating, a reminder that this world wasn't hers. The next morning, breakfast was served at a table long enough to seat 20. Layla sat alone at one end, a plate of food placed neatly before her. The chef, a man with a sharp mustache, lingered just long enough for her to notice the hesitation in his eyes, the pause before he set down the glass of orange juice, as though uncertain if she deserved to drink from the crystal. She picked up the fork anyway, refusing to let the silence swallow her. Later in the hall, she overheard two staff members whispering. "She doesn't belong here," one muttered. "She'll be gone soon enough," the other replied. Layla closed her eyes, the words cutting deeper than she wanted to admit. In the afternoon, Henry appeared briefly. He was dressed for business, phone pressed to his ear, his stride purposeful. He paused only long enough to look at her. "Are you settling in?" His voice was calm, detached. As well as anyone could, she said, her tone edged with defiance. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good. That's what I need." And just like that, he was gone, again swallowed by his empire. When the evening came, Layla stood on the balcony of her suite. Below the gardens stretched endlessly sculpted hedges and fountains glowing in the soft light. It was beautiful. It was prison. She hugged her arms against the cool air. Wealth had given her shelter, safety, and food, but it had also placed her under a microscope, where every look, every whisper reminded her she was not equal. This was Henry's house of glass, transparent, fragile, and unforgiving. And she was the one who didn't belong inside. Weeks passed in rigid rhythm. Doctors came and went, meals were served on time, and Stephanie's clipped footsteps echoed through the marble halls like a metronome. For all its comfort, the mansion felt more like a gilded cage than a home. Layla's body began to change. Her mornings carried a dull nausea. Her clothes grew tighter, and the weight of her decision pressed heavier with each passing day. Yet beneath the fear, a strange anticipation stirred something she hadn't expected. Life was growing inside her. One crisp morning, Henry announced he would accompany her to her next medical appointment. "It's important I see for myself," he said, adjusting his cufflinks as if scheduling another business meeting. Layla raised an eyebrow. "You want to see the baby? Or you want to make sure I'm keeping my end of the deal?" Henry didn't answer, but his silence spoke enough. The clinic was private, sleek, staffed by professionals who served the city's elite. Yet as Layla stepped through the doors, she felt the familiar prickle of judgment. The receptionist's smile faltered when her eyes landed on Layla's skin, her clothes, her posture. It was the same look she'd seen in stores and offices on sidewalks. "She doesn't belong here." Henry signed the forms, his presence smoothing what her appearance complicated. Still the stares lingered, whispers brushed against her like cold wind. In the examination room, the doctor, a tall man with silver hair, offered Henry a firm handshake before turning to Layla with a perfunctory nod. She noticed it. She always noticed. "Lie back, please," the doctor said briskly. He applied gel to her stomach, the cold shock making her flinch. The machine hummed to life, and a moment later sound filled the room, a steady, rapid rhythm, a heartbeat. Layla's breath caught. Her eyes widened as the sound echoed, filling every corner of the sterile room. It was fast, insistent, alive. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, uninvited, but unstoppable. She turned her head slightly, not wanting Henry or the doctor to see. Henry stood rigid beside her, arms crossed. For a long moment his expression remained carved from stone. But as the sound persisted, something shifted. His gaze softened just slightly, the calculation in his eyes giving way to something raw, something he couldn't quite control. "Everything looks good," the doctor said, glancing at the screen. "Healthy development so far." His words were directed to Henry more than to Layla, as though she were merely incidental. Layla's jaw clenched. Even here, even in this sacred moment of life sparking inside her, she was treated as secondary, her body essential, her presence dismissible. On the ride back, silence stretched between them. The city blurred past neon lights, smearing against the car windows. Layla pressed a hand against her stomach, still hearing the echo of that fragile rhythm. Finally, Henry spoke. "That sound, it changes things." She turned to him, surprised. "Changes what?" "It's still just a contract to you." He met her eyes briefly before looking back out the window. It's more than a contract now. It's real. Layla studied him, trying to read the man who guarded himself like a fortress. For a flicker of a moment, she thought she saw humanity breaking through the cracks, but she reminded herself not to trust it. That night, standing alone on her balcony, Layla replayed the sound in her head. The heartbeat, proof that something pure could emerge from an arrangement built on cold logic and desperate survival. She wrapped her arms around herself, whispering into the night, "I'll protect you. No matter what they think of me, no matter what they say, I'll protect you." In the distance, Henry stood by his own window, glass of whiskey in hand, staring out into the dark. For the first time in years, he didn't think about profits or control. He thought about the sound of a tiny heart and the woman who carried it, and how both were now bound to him in ways he had never planned. The mansion was quiet, its silence broken only by the steady rhythm of Layla's footsteps as she wandered the corridors. At first, the grandeur had stunned her. Crystal chandelier's paintings, worth more than she'd ever earned in her life. But now, each polished surface felt like a mirror, reflecting how out of place she was. Evenings stretched long and hollow. Sometimes she sketched by the window pencil, scratching against the sketchbook Henry had provided. Other times she simply sat in the dark, tracing the outline of her stomach, whispering to the child within. It was during one of those nights that Henry appeared in the doorway. He didn't knock. He never did. "You're awake," he said, his voice low, as though speaking too loudly might disturb the air. "Hard to sleep in a house that isn't yours," she replied without looking up. Henry stepped into the room, his presence filling the space like a shadow. "It's temporary, but while you're here, you'll have everything you need." Layla turned to him, then her eyes sharp. "Everything except belonging." The words caught him off guard. For a moment he said nothing. Finally he asked, "What do you mean?" She set the sketchbook aside, rising slowly. "You don't get it, do you? To you, this is business. To me, it's survival. And even here, surrounded by all this, I feel the same stares I felt on the street, the same judgment, because of my skin, because of who I am." Henry's jaw tightened. "In this house, you're protected. Protected from the cold, yes. Protected from hunger, maybe, but not from the looks, the whispers, the unspoken walls." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of truth. He shifted uncomfortably. Control was his armor, but her words pierced through. "If someone has treated you unfairly here," Layla cut him off, "it's not just here. It's everywhere. Do you know what it's like to hand in a job application and watch the manager's smile vanish the moment they see your skin? Do you know what it's like to be stopped by police for no reason other than walking home in the wrong neighborhood?" Henry stayed silent. He had never known. "I lost my job because of a lie." Layla continued, her voice steadier now. "No proof, just suspicion. And suspicion was enough because I was black. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm homeless. Not because I failed, but because the system is built to keep people like me at the bottom." Her words echoed against the marble walls, sharp and undeniable. For the first time, Henry didn't have a response. Numbers, contracts, logic, these had always been his weapons. But against her lived truth he had nothing. Layla turned away, blinking back the sting in her eyes. "You think you're giving me a chance, but you're just buying silence, a womb without a story." Henry exhaled slowly, as if the weight of her words pressed against his chest. "That's not what I intended." "Maybe not," she said softly, "but it's what it feels like." The silence stretched heavier than before. Henry finally turned toward the door, his posture rigid. "I'll think about what you said." When he was gone, Layla sank back into her chair, exhaustion washing over her. She pressed a hand against her stomach, whispering to the tiny life within, "We're more than this contract, more than what they think of us." Meanwhile, in his study, Henry poured himself a drink he didn't finish. For the first time in years, he replayed someone else's words instead of his own. The walls he had built, walls of wealth, power, control, suddenly felt less like protection and more like prison bars. And he wondered if Layla was right. Maybe he had never truly seen her at all. The gardens stretched wide, and orderly hedges trimmed into perfect lines, fountains, whispering under the late afternoon sun. For Henry, it was a space of control, every leaf in its place, every flower imported and pruned by experts. For Layla, it was foreign territory, too polished to feel alive. Yet she found herself drawn there each evening, craving the open air more than the cold perfection of the mansion's marble halls. She sat on a stone bench sketchbook, balanced on her knees, pencil moving slowly. Her drawings had shifted. No longer only faces from her past, but images of what could be two children holding hands, their skin a shade caught between hers and Henry's. The crunch of footsteps on gravel pulled her from the page. Henry appeared, jacket slung over his arm, his tie loosened. For once, he didn't look like the man who owned boardrooms. He looked human. Enjoying the garden, he asked, his tone formal, but softer than usual. Layla closed the sketchbook halfway. It's beautiful in a suffocating kind of way. He raised an eyebrow. Suffocating. It's too perfect, she said, gesturing around. No weeds, no wildflowers, no surprises. Just order. Feels less like a garden and more like a museum. Henry studied the hedges as if seeing them differently. Order prevents chaos. Without it, everything falls apart. Layla gave a small laugh. Or maybe order just hides the chaos until it breaks through. Her words lingered. For once, Henry didn't counter them with logic. Instead, he sat beside her, leaving just enough space between them. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of water trickling from the fountain filling the gap. Then Layla spoke, her voice low. When I was little, my mother used to plant sunflowers outside our apartment. They grew taller than me, stubborn and bright. The landlord hated them, said they made the place look messy. One day he tore them out. Henry glanced at her, surprised by the vulnerability in her tone. What did your mother do? Layla smiled faintly, though sadness lingered in her eyes. She planted them again. Every year. Said beauty belonged everywhere, not just in rich neighborhoods. Henry didn't know what to say. He had never thought of beauty as defiance. And you, Layla asked, suddenly turning the focus on him. What did your mother plant? His face stiffened. For a long time he didn't answer. Finally he said, Nothing. She wasn't around much. My father worked himself into the grave and she disappeared into parties and martinis. I learned early not to expect nurturing. The confession startled even him. He wasn't used to offering pieces of himself to anyone. Layla studied him, seeing not just the polished exterior but the cracks beneath. So that's why you think order is everything. Because love was chaos for you. Henry met her gaze, the sharpness in her words cutting deeper than he wanted to admit. Maybe. The sun dipped lower, staining the sky with orange and gold. In the fading light, the mansion loomed behind them, its windows reflecting fire. Layla closed her sketchbook fully. You built this life to keep control. But you can't control people, Henry. Not me, not those babies. His eyes flicked to her stomach, then back to her face. He spoke slowly, as though each word cost him. I know, and that terrifies me. The admission hung between them, raw and unpolished. For the first time, Henry Lewis, the man who owned everything, admitted to something he couldn't command. Layla turned her gaze back to the fountain. Maybe terror isn't the worst thing. Maybe it means you're finally feeling something real. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was fragile, alive, like the first breath of spring breaking through winter. A soft knock startled Layla the next morning. When she opened her suite door, no one was there, only a box resting on the floor, wrapped in crisp white paper, tied with a ribbon so precise it felt impersonal. She carried it inside, placed it on the bed, and slowly untied the ribbon. Inside lay a sketchbook bound in leather, and a set of colored pencils arranged like jewels. Tucked between them was a note in Henry's sharp handwriting, to help pass the time. Layla ran her fingers over the pencils, the colors brighter than anything she had touched in years. For a moment, she felt a flicker of warmth, but it quickly soured into suspicion. Was this a gift, or just another tool of control? That afternoon, she found Henry in the library, seated in a high-backed chair, papers spread before him. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "You left this at my door," she said, holding up the sketchbook. "Yes." His tone was matter-of-fact. "I thought you might need it." Her eyes narrowed. "Why?" Because you think drawing will distract me from the fact that I signed away my life. Henry's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to her challenge. Because you mentioned it once, that you used to draw. I remembered. The honesty disarmed her. She studied him searching for the trap, but his gaze held steady, less guarded than usual. Later, in the quiet of her room, Layla opened the sketchbook and began to draw. Her hands moved faster than her thoughts' shapes spilling onto the page. She sketched 2 children twins with skin the color of blended sunlight and earth standing in a playground surrounded by other children. But the others turned away, whispering, their eyes sharp with judgment. She shaded the scene heavily, each line etched with memories of her own childhood, being the only black girl in her class, the stares, the isolation, the teacher who praised her work only to accuse her of cheating when it seemed too good. When she finished, she stared at the page, her chest tight. This was the world her children would enter, caught between colors, belonging to both, yet accepted by neither. That evening, Henry passed by her balcony. He noticed the sketchbook resting on the table and paused. "May I?" he asked. Layla hesitated, then slid the book toward him. He flipped through until he reached the drawing. His brow furrowed, the edges of his controlled expression bending. "This is how you see it?" Layla crossed her arms. "This is how it is. Kids grow up fast when the world teaches them they're different. And these children, our children, they'll grow up hearing whispers. Too black for some, too white for others." Henry closed the book, his movements deliberate. "I can protect them." Layla shook her head. "You think money builds walls high enough to keep racism out? You can shield them from hunger, from cold, but not from looks, not from being told they don't belong." Her voice cracked, not from anger, but from a grief too familiar. Henry didn't argue. For once he simply stood there silent, the weight of her words pressing into him. The night settled around them, the garden below bathed in moonlight. Layla placed her hand on her stomach, feeling the faint stirrings of life. "They deserve a world that sees them in color," she said softly. "Not as mistakes, not as shadows, but as something beautiful." Henry's eyes followed her gesture. For the first time he seemed to understand that his wealth couldn't buy what mattered most: acceptance. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and polished steel, its walls lined with abstract art, meant to soothe but failing to hide the sterile weight of the place. Layla lay back on the padded table gel, cold against her skin, while the doctor adjusted the ultrasound wand. Henry stood beside her, arms folded, expression carefully composed, but his eyes never left the monitor. "Let's take a look," the doctor murmured, the screen flickering with gray shadows. Then the room filled with sound, not one rhythm, but two rapid heartbeats overlapping, echoing like a drumbeat of revelation. Layla's breath caught, her eyes widened, tears springing unbidden. "Two." The doctor smiled, pointing to the shapes on the screen. "Twins, both healthy, growing right on schedule." For a moment the world stilled. Layla pressed her hand against her stomach, awe and fear colliding inside her. 2 lives, 2 futures, twice the love and twice the risk. Henry leaned forward, his mask of control cracking. His voice was low, almost reverent. 2. Layla turned to him, searching his face. She had expected cold calculation, another businesslike nod. Instead, she saw something new, wonder fragile, and unguarded. On the way back to the mansion, silence filled the car, heavier than usual. Layla kept her hand on her stomach, feeling the enormity of it settle into her bones. Twins meant joy, yes, but also more mouths to feed, more eyes to shield from the cruelty of the world. Children with skin that would carry stories before they spoke a word. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you understand what this means? 2 black and white babies in a world that barely tolerates one." Henry's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "They'll have my name, my protection." Layla shook her head, frustration spilling into her voice. "Your name won't change how people see their skin. Or mine. They'll look at us and decide who we are before they know us, and you can't sign a contract to erase that." Henry glanced at her, his jaw set, but he didn't argue. For the first time, he seemed to realize the limits of his power. Back at the mansion, word spread quickly among the staff. Whispers trailed through the halls, twins mixed race illegitimate. Layla felt their eyes on her when she walked past the quiet judgment sharpened by envy and prejudice. She held her head high, but each look landed like a stone. That night she sat on her balcony, sketchbook open. Two small figures appeared under her pencil, children standing side by side. Their hands linked, their faces turned toward a horizon. She shaded in dark, uncertain strokes. Henry joined her, his posture unusually hesitant. "You're afraid," he said softly. Layla didn't look up from the page. "Aren't you?" He paused. "Yes." The word seemed to cost him. "But I've never been afraid of something I wanted before." Layla set the pencil down, finally meeting his eyes. "Then you'd better be ready, because these children won't just carry your name, Henry. They'll carry my skin, my story, and the world won't let you forget it." The night was still, the air cool, and for the first time Henry didn't try to control the silence. He let it stand heavy and honest between them. It began with whispers. A staff member careless with words at a dinner party. A nurse at the clinic eager to impress with a tantalizing detail. Within days, the rumor spread across polished hallways and smoky bars. Henry Lewis, the untouchable billionaire, was expecting a child with a homeless black woman. Then the tabloids caught the scent. Headlines screamed from glossy covers, mogul's secret heir, from the streets to the penthouse photographers, camped outside the mansion gates, their lenses aimed like rifles. Inside, Layla felt the pressure close in. Every time she looked out from her balcony, flashes erupted. Strangers shouted her name, twisting it into something sharp, something ugly. One morning she opened a magazine left carelessly on a table. The image stopped her cold, a grainy photo of her entering the clinic, Henry at her side. The caption read, "Billionaire surrogate or scandalous lover." Her stomach turned. They weren't interested in truth. They wanted spectacle, and her black skin made it easy to frame the story, a woman grasping for wealth, a schemer climbing into a world where she didn't belong. At breakfast, Henry skimmed a newspaper, his face impassive. "Ignore it," he said. "They'll move on when the next scandal breaks." Layla slammed the magazine down. "Easy for you to say. You'll always be Henry Lewis, the white billionaire with power. I'm the one they'll crucify. To them, I'm just a stereotyped, desperate, manipulative less than." His eyes flicked to hers, sharper than usual. "I won't let them touch you." Her laugh was bitter. "You can't stop people from looking at me and seeing exactly what they want to see. You can't buy away their prejudice." The words lingered in the dining hall, louder than the clink of silverware. Henry said nothing more, but for the first time the armor of certainty cracked in his expression. That evening, Layla turned on the television, curious despite herself. A panel of commentators debated her existence as if she were not human, but headline fodder. "She's clearly exploiting him," one man said, his smirk cruel. "She's homeless," another countered. "Maybe it's survival." "But look at her," the first insisted. "Women like her always have an angle." Layla shut off the screen, her chest burning. Women like her, black women, poor women, always defined by suspicion, never by truth. Later, Henry found her sitting in the dark, her arms wrapped around her knees. He hesitated in the doorway before speaking. "I can issue a statement, deny the rumors, clarify the contract." Layla looked up, her eyes fierce even through tears. "And what will that do? Turn me from a schemer into a paid womb. Either way, they erase me. Either way, I'm nothing but what serves your image." Henry froze. He had built empires out of words, but hers left him silent. "I'm carrying your children," she whispered, her hand pressing against her stomach. "And the world already decided who I am without ever knowing me." The night pressed heavy around them. For the first time, Henry understood the truth Layla had been telling him all along. Wealth could shield him from almost anything except the sharp blade of racism that cut her at every turn. The contractions came suddenly, sharp waves that stole Layla's breath and bent her body in two. Stephanie rushed to her side, panic in her usually cold voice. "It's time. We need to get her to the hospital now." Henry appeared within minutes, his face pale but his voice firm. "Car. Now!" He guided Layla down the marble staircase, each step a battle between her body and gravity. The hospital lights were blinding, the corridors humming with urgency. Nurses wheeled her through swinging doors. Henry closed behind his presence like a shield against the chaos. But not all shields held. In the delivery room, the attending physician, a man in his 50s with an air of detached superiority, glanced at Layla, then at Henry. His tone was brisk, almost dismissive. "We'll do what we can, but you should prepare yourself. Complications are common, especially in cases like this." Layla's eyes narrowed through the haze of pain. "Cases like what?" The doctor didn't answer. His glance said enough. Her skin, her background already, he had decided her risk was higher, her worth lower. Henry stepped forward, voice cutting like steel. "You will treat her with the same care you would give anyone else. If you can't, I'll have you replaced in 5 minutes." The doctor's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Orders from a billionaire carried more weight than the dignity of a black woman in pain. Layla gritted her teeth, tears streaking her face as the contractions tore through her. She clutched Henry's hand, her voice hoarse. "Don't let them dismiss me." Henry squeezed her hand tighter than he meant to. "I won't. I'm here." Hours blurred. Pain swallowed time, each cry of effort, a battle against both her body and the invisible walls of prejudice pressing in. Nurses came and went, their tones shifting whenever Henry's gaze lingered, polite under his watch, indifferent when he turned away. At one point, a nurse muttered under her breath. Another charity case, not realizing Layla heard her. The words stabbed deeper than the pain. But then sound. A cry small but fierce slicing through the sterile air. A boy the doctor announced almost begrudgingly, holding up the child before handing him to a nurse. Layla sobbed with relief, reaching out, but the nurse hesitated until Henry's sharp command cut through. "Give him to her. Now." Moments later, another cry filled the room, higher, softer, a girl. Layla's arms trembled as she held them both, their tiny faces pressed against her chest. Her tears fell freely now, onto skin so soft it seemed impossible they were real. Henry stood frozen, watching. The hard lines of his face softened awe breaking through years of discipline. He stepped closer, his voice rough. "They're perfect." Layla looked up at him, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "Perfect, yes. But the world won't see them that way." Henry met her gaze, something fierce kindling in his eyes. "Then the world will have to answer to me." In that moment, beneath the sterile lights and muffled footsteps, the contract that had bound them seemed smaller, almost meaningless. What mattered now were 2 tiny heartbeats and the unspoken vow to protect them against hunger, against cold, and against a world already sharpening its judgment. The hospital room quieted after the storm of labor. Machines hummed softly, the fluorescent lights humming even softer, but Layla heard only the tiny sounds against her chest. 2 newborns breathing in uneven rhythms, their fingers curling instinctively around hers. The boy's skin was lighter, his features mirroring Henry's sharp lines. The girl's skin was deeper, her curls already dark and tight, her face echoing Layla's own. 2 children, twin reflections of 2 worlds that had never been meant to meet. Tears blurred Layla's vision. She traced their faces with trembling fingers, marveling at the life she had carried, terrified of the life waiting for them outside these walls. Henry stood nearby, his usually impeccable posture forgotten. His hands hovered awkwardly before he finally reached out. When the nurse placed the boy into his arms, something shifted. The billionaire who measured success in profits and acquisitions now stood undone by the weight of a child no bigger than a loaf of bread. For a long moment, Henry simply stared, the hardness in his eyes melting into awe. He whispered almost to himself, "I never thought—" He stopped, his voice breaking unfinished words caught in his throat. Layla watched him torn between resentment and recognition. This man had bought her womb like a business deal, yet here he was undone by love he didn't know he was capable of. The girl whimpered, and Layla rocked her gently, whispering against her tiny ear, "Don't you worry, baby. Mama's here." Then she caught herself, the word mama heavy on her tongue. According to the contract, she wasn't supposed to be anyone's mother. The thought hollowed her chest. She had agreed to walk away. But how could she when every instinct screamed to hold them forever? A nurse interrupted, reaching for the infants. "We'll take them for monitoring now." Layla tightened her grip. "No, just a little longer." The nurse hesitated, eyes darting toward Henry. In this room, his word outweighed hers. But to Layla's surprise, Henry said quietly, "Let her hold them. For now." The nurse left reluctantly. Silence returned, filled only by the twins' soft breathing. Layla looked up at Henry, exhaustion lining her face. "Do you see them? They're not just your heirs. They're pieces of me, my blood, my story." Henry met her gaze. For once, he didn't try to control the narrative, didn't try to counter her with logic. He only nodded, his voice raw. "I see them. I see you." For the first time since signing that cold contract, Layla believed him. But belief didn't erase fear. She knew what awaited them beyond these walls' headlines, whispers, prejudice sharp as knives. Two children of blended skin in a world that thrived on division. The boy stirred in Henry's arms, his tiny mouth opening in a cry that shattered the quiet. A moment later, his sister joined him, their cries overlapping, filling the room with a raw, unfiltered music of survival. Henry looked down then at Layla, a question in his eyes. Layla answered with a weary, fragile smile. The first cry. The world has heard them now. And in that moment, she silently vowed no matter what contracts said, no matter what the world tried to take from her, she would never let her children's voices be silenced. Weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and fragile mornings. The twins grew stronger, their cries filling the mansion's polished halls like a reminder that life refused to be silent. Layla cherished every stolen moment, rocking them to sleep, tracing the curls on her daughter's head, the sharp chin of her son. Yet each day was also a countdown, a shadow creeping closer the contract. The agreement had been clear. Once the children were born, she would leave. No strings, no claims, no place in their future. On the morning she was meant to go, Layla packed the small suitcase Henry had provided. Her hands shook as she folded the few clothes she owned, her eyes drawn again and again to the cribs where the babies slept. Their soft breaths were daggers against her heart. Stephanie appeared at the door, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Lewis is waiting downstairs." Layla nodded, swallowing the ache in her throat. She kissed each child softly, lingering longer than she should, then lifted the suitcase and walked out. Henry was in the grand foyer, standing tall yet strangely uncertain. The suitcase felt heavier as she set it down at her feet. "It's time," she said, forcing her voice steady. He didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered on her, then on the staircase behind her, as if he expected the children to appear, as if he couldn't imagine this house without their mother in it. Finally, he stepped forward. "Are you really leaving?" Layla's breath caught, but she steadied herself. "That was the deal. You get your heirs. I go." Henry reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folder, the contract, its crisp edges cutting against his hand. He stared at it for a long moment before speaking. "This paper." His voice cracked, then strengthened. This paper was supposed to define everything. But it doesn't. Not anymore. And with a sudden, deliberate motion, he tore it in half. The sound echoed through the cavernous foyer. He tore again and again until the fragments fell around them like snow. Layla froze, her heart racing. "You can't just tear it up and expect everything to change." "I don't expect it," Henry said, stepping closer. "I need it. I need you. Not just for them, but for me. You brought something into my life that money, power, none of it ever could. I don't want you to leave. I don't want this to end here." Tears welled in her eyes, but anger and fear tangled with hope. "How can I trust you, men like you? They take, they control, they discard. I've spent my whole life being seen as less. How do I know you won't do the same?" Henry's voice dropped raw and unguarded. "Because I've already tried living without feeling, and it was emptiness. You showed me I could be more than that. And yes, I'm terrified, but I'd rather risk everything than lose you." Layla's defenses cracked, though doubt still pressed against her ribs. "And if it doesn't work, if it falls apart—" Henry reached for her hands, his grip firm, almost pleading. "Then we try again, and again, until it does. because I won't give up on you. Not ever." For a heartbeat, the world stilled the fragments of paper at their feet, the silence of the house, the weight of two futures colliding. Finally, Layla exhaled a sob breaking free. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay?" Henry pulled her into his arms, the embrace fierce, desperate, real. For the first time, the mansion no longer felt like a cage. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them had planned, but both of them needed.